As is Hashem, today we'll be learning in Maseches Berachos Mem Tes Amud Beis 49b, and we're going to have two sections in today's learning. The first section we'll deal with is if a person forgot the special insertions that are meant to be placed in Birkas Hamazon and Tefillah of Shabbos, Yontif, or Rosh Chodesh, and what the resolution perhaps for that is. And then the second section we'll deal with at the end is the machlokas we had in the Mishnah between Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda regarding how much food does one have to consume to create a zimun, either a kezayis or a kebetza. We'll find that there's a contradiction between their own psakim. In Psachim, we'll have two ways of resolving that. So Be'ezras Hashem, let's get started towards the bottom of Mem Tes Amud Aleph. Yasiv Rabbi Zera. It's about 7 lines from the bottom of the page. Yasiv Rabbi Zera Acharid Rav Gidl. So the Gemara tells us over here that there was an incident where Rabbi Zera was sitting behind Rav Gidl. Now we're going to see Rabbi Zera is essentially telling over the psakim that Rav Gidl was saying in front of Rav Huna. Yasiv Rabbi Zera acharid Rav Gidl. So Rabbi Zera was sitting behind Rav Gidl. V'yasiv Rav Gidl kamed Rav Huna. And Rav Gidl was sitting in front of Rav Huna. V'yasiv v'ka'amar. So Rav Gidl was sitting and saying over the following. He said 3 halachas, as we'll see. Now the scenario here is as follows. A person finished off in Birkas Hamazon, Bonei Berachos Yerushalayim Amen, and he forgot to say, the first case we'll see is Ritzei. He forgot to say Ritzei and it was Shabbos. So Ta'av Lo Hizkir Shel Shabbos, if a person made a mistake and he didn't mention in Birkas Hamazon Ritzei on Shabbos, so if he finished off Bonei Berachos Yerushalayim Amen, before he says the fourth bracha, Omer, he should say a makeup, which is Baruch Shenasan Shabbosos Lemnucha. Blessed is Hashem. Actually, the Mefarshim add in, you say the Shem Umalchus, you say it with Hashem's name, which is a bracha at the beginning. Baruch Shenasan Shabbosos Lemnucha. Blessed is Hashem, who gave Shabbosos to us for rest. La'amal Yisrael, to his nation Israel, bi'ahava, with love. La'os ulebris, as a sign and a covenant. Baruch Mekadesh HaShabbos. You finish off also with a Baruch. Blessed is Hashem, who sanctified Shabbos. So there's a special insertion, said Rav Gidl, in front of Rav Huna, and Rabbi Zera is telling us over that you could make up if you finished off Bonei Berachos Yerushalayim Amen and didn't say Ritzei. And this works. You don't have to repeat Birkas Hamazon. Amar Lei, so Rav Huna turned to Rav Gidl in the story, and he said, Man Amra, who said this psak? So Rav Gidl said, Rav is actually our Rebbe, Rav. Rav was the Rebbe of Rav Huna. We know very often we say Rav Huna Amar Rav, Rav Gidl Amar Rav. Rav was the one who passed in this halacha. Hadar Yasiv Amar. Rav Gidl continued and said another halacha, which is Ta'av Lo Hizkir Shel Yom Tov. Again, similar idea. He made a mistake. He finished off Bonei Berachos Yerushalayim Amen on Yom Tov, and he forgot to say Ya'aleh V'yavo like he was supposed to. So there's another insertion, same idea. Omer, he should then say Baruch, again, a bracha at the beginning. Shenasan Yamim Tovim La'amo Yisrael. Blessed is Hashem, who gave Yamim Tovim, these good days, to his nation Israel, Simcha, as a joy, for joy, Ulezikaron, and a remembrance, Baruch Mekadesh Yisrael V'azmanim, blessed is Hashem, who sanctifies Yisrael and the times. So again, finish off with Baruch as well. Amar Lei, so Rav Huna said again to Rav Gidl, Man Amra, who says this? Rav, and Rav Gidl said again, this is our Rebbe Rav, who said over the second psak as well. Hadar Yasivika Amar, Rav Gidl said a third halacha, Ta'av Lo Hizkir Shel Rosh Chodesh. Now, it's Rosh Chodesh, and he finished off Bonei Berachos, but he forgot to say Ya'aleh V'yavo. Omer, so then Rav Gidl said, Baruch Shenasan Roshei Chadashim La'amo Yisrael Zikaron. So now this is a shorter nosach. He said, this is all that Rabbi Zera said over that Rav Gidl had said, blessed is Hashem, who gave us Roshei Chadashim to his nation Israel Zikaron, for a remembrance. Now Rabbi Zera finished off and said, V'lo yadana, I wasn't sure, I don't know, because I didn't get to ask Rav Gidl, I Amar Ba Simcha, Ilo Amar Ba Simcha. So firstly, like in Yom Tov, where you also mention Simcha other than the Yom Tov itself, the Zmanim, I don't know if on Rosh Chodesh also you were supposed to mention the word Simcha as well. Number one, I'm not sure. Secondly, said Rabbi Zera, I Chasimba, Ilo Chasimba. I'm also not sure if he finished off the Nusach with Baruch Atah Hashem or not. And this actually, the Mefarshim say, is contingent on the last Shaila. Because if you only mention one theme, so generally you don't have to say Baruch at the end. But if you mention two themes in this context, the Zmanim and Simcha, so then actually you would say Baruch at the end. So really these 2 points that Rabbi Zera wasn't sure are contingent on each other. And thirdly, said Rabbi Zera, Ididei de Rabbe. I wasn't sure if Rav Gidl was saying his own Chiddush in this case, or if he was saying over this Memra also, this third psak, in the name of Rav, his Rebbe. So the Gemara says we leave off, that's unclear. Okay, continuing on now, the Gemara tells us an incident that ties in. Gidl bar Yomi havakoi kamed Rav Nachman. Gidl bar Yomi was in front of Rav Nachman. Ta'ar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman made a mistake. Either it was Shabbos or Yontif, let's say, and he made a mistake and he forgot to say Ritzei or Yalav Yavo on Yontif. Turning to Mem Tesem Beis. V'hadar l'reisha, and he actually went to the beginning of Berachos and he started benching again. So Amar Le, Gidl bar Yomi turned to Rav Nachman. He said, "My time, Avid Marhachi. Why did you go back to the beginning?" Amar Le, Rav Nachman said, "To Amar Rabbi Shila, Amar Rav, because Rabbi Shila teaches also in the name of Rav. Ta'achaz al Rosh. If a person makes a mistake in Berachos and he forgets Ritzei or he forgets Yalav Yavo on Rosh and Yom Tov, he goes back to the beginning." Says Gidl, V'ha Amar, but V'ha Amar Rav, Huna Amar Rav, like we just learned that Rav Huna Amar Rav, or Rav Gidl Amar Rav said, Ta'ah, if he makes a mistake, Amar Baruch Shenasan. He is able to say this Nusach Baruch Shenasan and make up Ritzei or Yalav Yavo for Yom Tov. So Amar Le, so Rav Nachman said back, Lav Itmar Allah, wasn't it clarified about that? And I mentioned this before. Amar of Menashia bar Tachlifa, Amar Rav, Lo Shanu, Ela Shelo Pasach Ba'tov V'Ametiv. The allowance to catch your mistake and make it up with this Nusach on Shabbos or Yontif is only if you haven't yet started the fourth bracha. Aval Pasach Ba'tov V'Ametiv. Once you've started that already, the fourth bracha, Chozer L'Rosh, then you'll have to go back to the beginning of Berachos Hamazon and start benching again. So therefore the Gemara says this allowance to make it up with this Nusach you add in after Boni Baracham of Yerushalayim Amein would only be if you haven't yet started the fourth bracha. But if you started the fourth bracha, you'll have to go back to the beginning of Berachos Hamazon. Now on a similar note, Amar of Yidi bar Ovin, Amar of Amram, Amar of Nachman, Amar Shmuel. So really Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, Ta'av v'lo hiskir shel Rosh Chodesh b'tefillah. Now, on Rosh Chodesh, if a person made a mistake and he forgot to say Yalav Yavo, so it depends where he forgot to make to say Yalav Yavo. If it was in Tefillah, in the Shmona Esrei, Machzirin Oso, then he would have to go back. Important to note here, the exception to this is in Ma'ariv of Rosh Chodesh, because we learned actually the halacha is you don't have to repeat the Amidah. But in the other Tefillas of Rosh Chodesh, you would have to repeat the Amidah if you forgot Yalav Yavo. But by Berachos Hamazon, if you forgot to say Yalav Yavo in Berachos Hamazon, Ein Machzirin Oso, again, Rosh Chodesh, you wouldn't have to repeat Berachos Hamazon. Amar le Rav Idi bar Avin le Rav Amram. So Rav Idi bar Avin said to Rav Amram, who was actually quoting this Meimra, Maishna Tefillah u'Maishna Berachos Hamazon. What's the difference really between Tefillah and Berachos Hamazon? What's the Pshat in Shmuel? Why is he saying that you would have to repeat Tefillah but not Berachos Hamazon if you forgot Yalav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh? So Amar le, so Rav Amram said, Lididi kashili. I had the same challenge. I didn't understand it. V'sha'il te Rav Nachman. So Rav Amram said, I went and I asked this to Rav Nachman in order to clarify this Meimra of Shmuel, because if you look in the previous Meimra, it goes, actually the people who are discussing, Rav Idi bar Avin, Amar Rav Amram, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. So I went to Rav Nachman, who was closer to the Baal Meimra to Shmuel, and I asked him, do you know why Shmuel made this distinction? Amar li, and Rav Nachman said to me, Minei davar Shmuel le'shmieli. I didn't hear this from the mouth of Shmuel clearly. So I don't know necessarily this is what Shmuel would say is the distinction. But logically we could perhaps create a distinction. What's the difference? Tefillah dechayvahi on Rosh Chodesh or on the weekday, there's a chiyuv to daven. Right? You have a chiyuv to daven. Since there's an obligation to daven, and on Rosh Chodesh you have to add into the davening Yalav Yavo. So machzirin oso. Therefore, if you miss out, you leave out Yalav Yavo, you'll have to repeat the Shmona Esrei. Birkas mezayna, but regarding Birkas Hamazon, to ibai achil, ibai lo achil, on Rosh Chodesh you don't have to have a seuda. It's very interesting. Rosh Chodesh you don't necessarily have to have a seuda, and therefore there's not a chiyuv to bench. If you want to bench because you ate, so then that's beautiful. You say Yalav Yavo, but you don't have a chiyuv to bench because you don't have a chiyuv to eat. So therefore, in machzirin oso, you wouldn't have to repeat Birkas Hamazon if you forgot Yalav Yavo. So Rav Idi bar Avin turned to Rav Amram and he said, El me'ata, based on that, Shabbos es v'yamim tovim, delo sagi delo achil, on Shabbos and Yontif, you have to have seudos. So logically then on those days, achinami de'itai hador, if you forgot Ritzei or you forgot Yalav Yavo on Yom Tov, you would have to repeat Birkas Hamazon based on your logic. Amar le'in. So Rav Amram said back, yes, based on what we just concluded, if there's a chiyuv to be involved in that, you would have to repeat it. So on Shabbos and Yontif and Birkas Hamazon, you'd have to repeat it. And the Gemara says, "V'haraya the Amar of Shila Amar Rav Tach Chazal Rosh." If Shila Amar Rav said on Shabbos and Yantiv, if you forgot Ritzeh on Shabbos or Yalav Yav on Rosh Chodesh, you would go back to the beginning of Birkas Hamazon. He says the Gemara of Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav Tach Amar Baruch Shenasan. But we learned earlier that you could make it up if you finish Boni Berachamav and say this Nusach of Baruch Shenasan on Shabbos and Yantiv. The Gemara answers Lavit Marla, but we've already explained Lo Shanu El Shelo Pasach Ba'Tov V'Ametiv. The makeup ability with this Nusach is only if you haven't yet started the fourth bracha. But if you've already started the fourth bracha, you would indeed have to go back to the beginning of Birkas Hamazon because there is a chiyuv to bench on those days, and therefore missing it would make the Birkas Hamazon faulty in the sense to repeat Birkas Hamazon altogether. Moving on to the second section now. We said in the Mishnah Machlokes, how much does one have to consume in order to make a zimun? Reb Meir says you only have to eat a kezayis, which is an olive-sized amount of food, to make a zimun, and Reb Yehuda says you have to eat more, a kibetza, an egg size. So the Gemara is about to show that this seems to be contradicted by their very same shitas in a Mishnah Maseches Pesachim. Hadkama mizamnin. So the Gemara says Lameimer, this would imply that Reb Meir chashiv le kezayis, that Reb Meir says a kezayis is a significant amount of food for zimun purposes. Rabbi Yehuda kibetza, and Rabbi Yehuda says that an egg size amount, which is more, that's how much is necessary for zimun. So the Gemara says the problem is in Maseches Pesachim we seem to have the exact opposite shitas. Now, before we see this inside, Rashi tells us there's actually the Reisha of that Mishnah, which is not quoted here. So let's jump to Rashi for a second. Mishi Yatzim Yerushalayim. El Minei Mairi. Rashi is the third line in Rashi on the page. The beginning of that Mishnah in Pesachim says like this: Haholech lishchodes pischa. If somebody went to shech his carbon pesach, so he's traveling from a city outside of Yerushalayim towards Yerushalayim. And then, as he's traveling, he remembers he has chametz in his house that he hasn't gotten rid of. If he can go back to his house and destroy it, and then return to the mitzvah, then he should take care of it. Now, if he's not able to, he can nullify it in his heart. And similarly, this is the case we're going to see in the Mishnah here. What happened was a person had kachim kalim. Now kachim kalim, like for example korban shlamim, are meant to be eaten in Yerushalayim. Actually, if you bring it outside of Yerushalayim, it becomes pasul. And we're going to see if somebody was traveling outside of Yerushalayim from within, and then he realized that he had kachim kalim in his hand, which means it became invalidated. That's the seifa of this Mishnah. So now let's look back into the Gemara. And the Mishnah in Pesachim tells us, if somebody was traveling from within Yerushalayim, and he remembered that after he left the city of Yerushalayim, he had basar kodesh, kachim kalim, in his hand. Kachim kalim is karbanos that need to be eaten in Yerushalayim. Once you go out of Yerushalayim, it becomes pasul. And now it needs to be destroyed. Now ideally, it's meant to be destroyed in Yerushalayim in a place called the Biro, which we're going to see. They would use holy consecrated wood to destroy it. However, im avar tzufim, if he already passed the place called Tzufim, which Rashi says is a place that from there you could still see the Beis HaMikdash, but beyond that you can't. So if he's past this area, it's quite far already. Sorfa b'mkomo. So Chazal say he's allowed to burn that kachim kalim in the place wherever he is. Make a little bonfire and destroy it. But if he hasn't passed that location yet, chozer v'sorfo lifnei abira. So then he should burn it lifnei abira, which is the location where they would burn kachim kalim that's become pasul, that's become invalidated, in Yerushalayim on Har Habayis me'atze hama'aracha, using the consecrated woods that were to be used on the mizbeach. So the point is, the Mishnah there tells us that in a scenario where he hasn't yet passed the tzufim, he should go back to this place, to the bira, in order to burn the kachim kalim that has now become pasul. And the Mishnah there says, Ad kama him chayzrim. How much kachim kalim does he have to have, or how much chametz would he have to have back in his house to necessitate returning? Rabbi Meir Rabbi Meir says it has to be that it's a kibetza size, an egg size. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yehuda says both would have to be only an olive size. So asks the Gemara, it would appear from that Mishnah in Pesachim that they are machshiv, or they make significant the opposite measurement based on what we learned in Maseches Berachos is the amount for zimun. Seems to be a stira. it's two terutzim. Amar Rabbi Yochanan is the first answer. Mochlefes hashita. We have to switch around the shitas in Pesachim to reflect the shitas in Berachos, and therefore in Pesachim, really Rabbi Meir must be the shita who says kizayis would necessitate, again going back to your house to burn the chametz, or returning to Yerushalayim to burn the kachim kalim that became invalidated. And Rabbi Yehuda would be the one who says it has to be kibetza. So it would reflect the positions as in Maseches Berachos. Abaye is the second answer. He says, Lo olam lo tepach. No, don't switch around the shitas. Keep the shitas in Berachos the same and in Pesachim the same. Hacha bekroi pligi. Rather, it's dependent on different factors. Here, regarding zimun, it's based on psukim. Rabbi Meir savar ve'achalta zu achila. Rabbi Meir says like this: the pasuk that talks about Birkas Hamazon and zimun says ve'achalta. Now, ve'achalta teaches us achila, that in order to make Birkas Hamazon and zimun, you have to have an achila. This savata, the next part of the pasuk, is read as a separate clause. Zu shesiya. This refers to drinking. Ve'achila bekizayis. Now we know achila in general, most consumptions in the Torah, is a measurement of a kizayis, of an olive size. So therefore it's logical that if we say there has to be a zimun, it's mistama the size of a kizayis, because the Torah just requires general achila. By the way, Kedai to point out, the fact that it says shsiya, you need to have a shsiya as well. Some shittas hold in order to be chayv in Birkas Hamazon midayraisa, you also have to drink. So to lead benching, perhaps, you'd have to actually have a drink as well. Rabbi Yehuda savar, but Rabbi Yehuda holds v'achalta v'savata. Actually, the two words are read together. Eat and be satiated. And what does it teach us? Achila sheyesh ba svia. In order to be chayim Birkas Hamazon and zimun, it has to be a consumption that has a satiation associated with it, and that's more than the ordinary amount of kizayis. Ve'ezazu, what is that? Kibetza. That's an egg size. So therefore, in regards to Birkas Hamazon and zimun, it's based on: do you need an achila, which is Meir shita, which is a kizayis, or do you need a svia, which is a behuda, which is a kibetza? And Hasam says Abaye, regarding Pesachim, the machlokis there, Bisvara pligi. It's a machlokis in logic. Rabbi Meir savar chazarasa kitumasai. Rabbi Meir says the necessity to return, again, for chametz to burn it in your house, destroy it in your house and not just be mevatel it, and kachim kalim to burn it in your shalayim, would be the same requirement like the ability to convey tumah. Ma tumah, so just as with foods, in order to convey tumah, the kibetza, it has to be food the size of a egg. So logically, we would compare that to needing to return. It would have to be an egg size. Rabbi Yehuda says returning would be like its isser, meaning general ma'achalos asuris. We know in the Torah is usually a kizayis. Ma'isur b'kizayis, just as the prohibition of most foods in the Torah, the measure is a kizayis in olive size. The necessity to return would also only be if it's a kizayis. So therefore, says Abaye, the two arguments are reflective of different factors between Berachos and Pesachim, and they're not contingent on each other. Therefore, you don't have to change them. We're stopping here at the Mishnah towards the bottom of Amud Beis, about 10-12 lines from the bottom. As Hashem will pick up tomorrow with the new Amud Nun Amud Aleph. In the meantime, everybody have a wonderful day.